Well, hello everybody. It's GW. I'm doing another little video blog here. Do it real quick. I have a really busy day ahead of me here, so got to go hit the golf course later today. So it's just going to be an awful day. But want everybody to sign in down below, subscribe, follow, do whatever it is you got to do so that I know that you're watching these things and see whether or not it keeps me worthwhile. Send me a comment every now and then. It's always nice to read what somebody thinks about what you have here. And by the way, if it's a bad comment, just keep it to yourself. I only like to read good comments. So anyway, I am talking today because I watched a documentary the other night, and it was about a guy by the name of Bob Putman. Now, Bob Putman has been around a long time, and 30, 45 years ago, he wrote a book, a short book, and he's a sociologist, and he just had this idea based on what had happened to him in Italy that when people stop joining clubs, that democracy takes a hit. Now that's greatly oversimplified, but when people stop joining things and learning how to be a democracy, then the actual fulfillment of a democracy in the government takes a hit. And he started this off in Italy, and back in I believe the 70s, and Italy had changed form of government, and they started fresh, and so he had kind of a blank sheet that he could just kind of add things to, and he found that there was a definite correlation in his mind between states, areas in the country that were being, governed like a state in the United States, and they were being governed that way. But some areas were more all inclusive than other areas, and other areas were more, I'm the guy in charge, so I will tell you what to do. And so they had this thing, and it really did kind of work out. So he had a thing called social capital. Now, as an introvert, and that would be me. As an introvert, I am more than comfortable sitting in my house doing things like this, which is basically me talking to you, but there's nobody else in the room here with me. It's just me. And it's just my train of consciousness that you're hearing right now. But I'm very comfortable doing this. I don't need to have a lot of people around me to energize me. Now, my wife, on the other hand, is very much an extrovert, and she is always finding people to have around her, so that she very seldom, spends a day that she doesn't on the phone talking to people, that she isn't having lunch with other people, isn't doing something with other people, and and it works. But as an introvert, I find it very calming to sit there and have time that, okay, it's just me. All right, so what has happened in the United States? Because we are in a time in this election that we are having to choose between, do we want to have an authoritative, strong man lead, a it wouldn't be quite as strong as a Hitler or a Putin or somebody like that, but it would be leaning in that direction, leaning heavily in that direction. And 20 years from now, it could be that. Or do we want to continue with the democracy? It really is a choice that we have to make here very shortly. So when you think of that, is democracy at risk? And is it really as simple because we stopped joining clubs? Now, my generation, I'm a baby boomer. My generation, I was born, in the early 50s, and my dad was, as a minister, he had all the stuff that goes on at a church, and all the old ladies groups and the men's groups and all this good thing. I mean, he had all the socialization that he could probably stand, that he could go do and do that at any time, and he did, and he did, and he liked that. But he also joined everywhere that we lived. He was a member of Kiwanis, and most places that we lived, he was a Mason. And interestingly, he never encouraged me to go and do that. So I didn't. So as I grew up, I did the stuff in school and I did the church stuff and everything. But when I became an adult and I left home, I didn't go out and find the local Kiwanis Club and join that. And I didn't go out and find the different things to join. I spent a long time in the military, and I guess you could say that was a club, but in some way, shape, or form, I guess it is. But I just didn't do that. And the people in my generation, for the most part, don't. But what's interesting is that when you have a democracy and you have a government that is being governed, and you have all these different bodies in the government that have to communicate with one another, and they have to negotiate with one another, and they have to recognize that, okay, we're going to come out with an ending here that is not exactly what you want, but it's not exactly what I want either, but it's somewhere that we can both work with it. Well, the place that you learn how to do that is your local clubs. So even a club as simple as say a book club, you have the group of people that are in the book club, and you have to figure out, okay, who's going to be the next month, what are we going to read? What book are we going to read? Who's in charge? What are we doing there? When they're in charge, do we have to do it their way? I mean, are they going to do it so that it becomes more of a social club rather than a let's talk about the book club? Or in the next month, when someone else is in charge, is it going to be more of a book club and really delve into the intricacies of the book, or what? I mean, it's a teaching ground for how to do a democracy. All the groups that you have in a church, back in the day, when in many small towns, the major social interaction is the church. Now, I went to high school in a little town of about 2,000. There were half a dozen churches in that town. Now, that's interesting. I now live in a subdivision that has about 7,000 people in it, and there's no church inside the subdivision. There's lots of activities going on, but there's no church. There's no central thing like that. It's interesting. Not sure why it's interesting. It's interesting to me, probably no one else. So you have this proving ground for a democracy. And as you went through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, one thing that you can look at, and this guy did, obviously Bob Putman did, but you take a look at the number of membership in a Kiwanis club or a Lions club, or a Rotary or anything like that, and it steadily decreased. And you take a look at the membership in a church, and it has steadily gone down. So when you have clubs, it just, as I was saying, it just provides a proving ground, a training ground for a person to learn how to work in a democracy, to learn how to do the negotiations, to learn how to compromise, how to come up with a solution that is good for the main body, not just for you, but good for the main body. If you don't have these proving grounds, then what you have is people being elected who have not had the background, who have not had the need to learn how to work with other people. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous because you take a look at what we do in society, we look at what we do in business, we look at what we do everywhere, but it's not the same as when you're working with a volunteer organization. And so, can it really be this simple? I mean, that the fact that we don't have as many people going into these clubs, that we don't have the amount of people trained, able to lead organizations, because in all honesty, leadership is leadership. Being able to lead a small group is a skill. Being able to lead a larger group is a bigger skill. But it's one that you don't just walk into the big group and say, here I am, I'm going to do wonderfully. You almost always have to work your way up through that so that you can get the experience that you need to have. So, what does that really mean? Well, I tell you, I never joined as many organizations as my dad did, as my mom did. You know, from the early 90s, I mean, you have to worry about democracy now. When you look at it at this simplistic view and you take a look at the people that we have in Congress today, and you take a look at the ones who are getting the biggest headlines, do you really think that they worked hard with a book group to be able to work with other people? Or do you think that they just bullied their way ahead? We need to make sure that we trust the people that we put in the government to be able to govern us. In the right now, we have about 25% of the people who will say that they trust the government to work in our behalf and to do a good job doing that. 25%. That's an amazingly small number, but it's down from nearly 80 to 90% that trusted the government in the 1950s. You know, there was one other thing that came up on why we have all these things that are down. I hate to say this. TV. In the early 1950s, people didn't have a lot of TVs. TV was not widespread across the country. In the late 1940s, certainly didn't have very much. Had radio, and people would sit down at night and they'd listen to a half-hour show, but then they would go off and they'd do other things. They had time that they needed to fill. And when they took that time and filled that time, they went to bed earlier, probably, got better sleep. That probably helped them out. But they also went and they worked in the day. And then in the evening, they go, wow, I got 3 hours to kill here. Well, why don't I go and I talk with my buddies down here doing this, or work with this group, or, we'll go and see if we can't figure out a way to make this little town a little bit better. It doesn't happen as much anymore. We come home, we sit down, we watch 3 hours of TV, we go to bed. It's amazing if you take a look at just that one thing. And that doesn't even bring in the internet. It doesn't bring in the phone screen time that we all do. Me too, by the way. And the screen time that we spend on our phones. Never thought of it until I watched this documentary. Never thought about that lack of joining, that lack of being with other people, that lack of being able to have a conversation where you were able to actually have a trust in the conversation, that you could have a meaningful discussion, and you weren't necessarily going to change the person's mind, but you could have a meaningful discussion and not alienate that person for the rest of their life. So that's really all I've got to say today. But try to be with other people, listen to other people, hear other people's comments. You don't have to agree with them, but respect them. And let's see if we can't do this. And oh, by the way, If you haven't done it yet, if you're listening to this and it's not the second Tuesday in November yet, go vote. You know, go vote. I don't care who you vote for. Go vote. It's important. We need to have the vote. So be sure to sign up down below. I'm GW. I enjoyed this. I hope you did. Thanks a lot.